When the Browns walked up to the podium on day 3 of the NFL draft and called Shedeur Sanders' name, the football world tilted just a little. Not because Shedeur didn't belong, anyone who'd watched him at Colorado knew the talent was real. The shock was because Cleveland made the call, and rumors spread fast that it wasn't the owner's idea. It wasn't Jimmy Haslam's stamp of approval. No, this was Andrew Berry's bold, defiant swing. And let's be clear, that doesn't happen in Cleveland. In most NFL organizations, owners meddle. They demand. They throw their weight around. But in Cleveland, Jimmy Haslam isn't just another voice, he's the voice. He has final say. And when a GM decides to go against the king, that's not just risky. That's career suicide.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
But Andrew Berry did it anyway. Maybe it was guts. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe it was Berry seeing something no one else did. But when Shedeur's name went on that card, it wasn't just a draft pick, it was a declaration of war. And right away the fallout was brutal. Reporters whispered about disagreements in the war room. Anonymous sources leaked that Haslam was furious. The headlines weren't about Shedeur's talent. They were about dysfunction at the very top of the Browns. And you know how this league works? When the boss is mad, everybody notices. But then came training camp. And preseason. And suddenly the story shifted. Because Shedeur wasn't some charity pick. He wasn't a publicity stunt. He wasn't Dion's son, let's sell some jerseys. He was good. Really good. Precise throws. Command of the huddle. Reading defenses like a veteran. And the kicker? He did it all with a poise that made him look like he'd been there before. Fans noticed. The media noticed. Even veterans on the team started pulling him aside, showing respect, recognizing the leadership he brought to the field. And every highlight, every touchdown, every confident drive made Andrew Berry look like a genius. But here's the problem. It also made Jimmy Haslam look like a fool. Because what does it say when your general manager, the guy you almost fired for going rogue, suddenly looks smarter than you? What does it say when the rookie you didn't want is now the most talked about player on your roster? It says you were wrong. And for an NFL owner, especially one like Haslam, that's unacceptable. That's when the tension turned into a full-blown Cold War. On one sideline you had Andrew Berry standing tall, smiling like a man who knew he'd placed the right bet. On the other, Jimmy Haslam, scowling, muttering, trying to control the narrative before it slipped completely out of his hands. And in the middle of it all? Shedeur Sanders. The rookie didn't ask for this. He didn't choose to be a pawn in some billionaire's ego battle. But that's what happens when you're Shedeur Sanders. When your father is Dion. When your name already carries weight. You don't just play quarterback, you carry politics, branding, media hype, and the burden of expectation. The more Shedeur thrived, the deeper the divide grew. Fans started chanting his name at practice. Media outlets ran with the story of a young star shining while the veterans faltered. And analysts began to openly question, why isn't this kid the starter already? And that's when Jimmy Haslam snapped. Insiders say he went directly to Andrew Berry and laid it out in the bluntest terms possible. You went against me. If this blows up, you're done. Imagine that. A general manager finally nails a late-round pick, turns it into gold, brings energy to a franchise drowning in dysfunction, and the response from ownership is a threat. Not congratulations. Not support. A threat. Because for Haslam, it was never about Shedeur's ability. It was about control. And the fact that Andrew Berry had taken that away, just for a moment, was enough to light the fuse. This is the toxic heart of Cleveland's problem. It's not talent. It's not coaching. It's not even bad luck, though Lord knows they've had plenty of that. It's ego. Owners who think they're football minds when really they're businessmen with too much pride. Men who can't stand being proven wrong, even if it means their team actually wins. So here we are. Andrew Berry's job hangs in the balance, not because he failed but because he succeeded too well. Shedeur Sanders is on the roster, shining, climbing, winning the hearts of the fanbase. And Jimmy Haslam is pacing in his suite, wondering how he lost control of the story. But here's the kicker. Firing Berry now would only make things worse. Because the fans aren't blind. They've lived through endless cycles of rebuilds and firings. They know dysfunction when they see it. And if Haslam acts as the GM who brought them Shedeur, the backlash will be nuclear. Cleveland fans are loyal, but they're not stupid. They've been begging for a quarterback savior for decades. They see the potential in Sanders. They see the hype, the poise, the magic. And if Haslam stands in the way of that, he's not just fighting Berry. He's fighting the entire city. And let's not forget Shadur himself. The kid may be a rookie, but he's not powerless. Not in this media age. He's already bigger than most rookies because of his name, his talent, and his ability to connect with fans. If Shadur ever so much as hinted that he wasn't happy in Cleveland, forget it. The franchise would implode. So Haslam is boxed in. Fire Barry and he looks petty. Keep Barry and he looks weak. It's the kind of no-win scenario that could only happen in Cleveland. Meanwhile, Andrew Barry plays it cool. Smiling on the sidelines. Talking with Shadur. Acting like a man who knows history is on his side. Because if Shadur keeps climbing, keeps performing, keeps proving doubters wrong, Barry becomes untouchable. He becomes the GM who stood up to ownership and won. And Jimmy Haslam? He becomes the man who nearly destroyed it all. That's the drama. That's the chaos. That's the Cleveland Browns in a nutshell. A rookie quarterback caught in the middle of a billionaire's bruised ego and a GM's desperate gamble. But let's be honest, fans don't care about the politics. They don't care about Haslam's pride or Barry's career. They care about one thing, winning. And they know Shadur Sanders gives them their best shot at that. So the pressure keeps building. Every incomplete pass from Dillon Gabriel. Every mediocre drive from Joe Flacco. Every flash of brilliance from Shadur in practice. It all piles onto Haslam's desk. And one day soon he's going to have to make a choice. Does he double down on control and risk losing his fanbase, his locker room, and maybe even Shadur himself? Or does he swallow his pride, admit Barry was right, and hand the keys to the future over to the kid who's already captured the city's imagination? Either way, the clock is ticking. And in Cleveland, the margin for error is gone. Because Shadur Sanders isn't just another quarterback. He's the line in the sand. The one who could finally end decades of dysfunction, or be the next name on the list of what could have beens. And the truth? That decision doesn't belong to Barry anymore. It doesn't even belong to Stefanski or the players or the fans. It belongs to Jimmy Haslam. The same Jimmy Haslam who's already threatening to fire the man who made it all possible. Only in Cleveland. The thing about tension in an NFL front office is that it never stays behind closed doors. You can put on a smile for the cameras, you can release polished PR statements, you can even deny every rumor, but the cracks always show. And in Cleveland? Those cracks have turned into gaping holes. The moment Shadur Sanders laced up his cleats for preseason and started slinging darts, the whispers about Andrew Barry weren't whispers anymore, they were chants. The fans knew who pulled the trigger on that draft card. They knew who saw the vision when others scoffed. And they knew who tried to stand in the way. Jimmy Haslam could feel it. Every time Shadur's name got cheered, every time his highlights replayed on ESPN, it wasn't just praise for a rookie quarterback. It was a reminder that Barry had defied him, and won. And you better believe that nod at him. Because in Haslam's world, money equals control. He's the billionaire, the boss, the man who writes the checks. And the idea that his general manager, a guy technically employed by him, could undercut his authority and still come out looking like the hero? That was a nightmare. So what did he do? He doubled down. He started leaking to insiders. Reports surfaced about concerns with Sanders' durability. Anonymous sources suggested, the coaching staff isn't sure he's mentally ready for the NFL grind. And just like that, the spin machine was in motion. But here's the problem with spin, you can't fool fans who've actually seen the kid play. Because Shadur wasn't just good. He was electric. The way he carried himself in the huddle, the way he stood tall after taking a hit, the way he read a defense like he'd been studying it his whole life, it was undeniable. And fans aren't stupid. They weren't going to buy into some PR campaign trying to downplay what was happening right in front of their eyes. If anything, Haslam's pushback only made Barry look stronger. It painted him as the underdog GM fighting against meddling ownership to deliver the player Cleveland desperately needed. And you know what fans love more than anything? A rebel inside the building. Someone willing to stick it to the boss for the sake of winning. Barry became that guy. And Haslam? He started looking like the villain. Then came the breaking point. Week 2 of the preseason. Browns down by 10. Dillon Gabriel struggling to move the ball. Fans restless. Chants for Sanders echoing through the stadium. And then, with less than 8 minutes left, Barry walks down to the sideline. Cameras caught it. He whispered something to a coach, nodded, and walked away. A minute later, Shadur trotted onto the field. The stadium exploded. It was like watching a rock star walk on stage. People stood. They screamed. They waved their phones in the air to record the moment. And in that instant, every ounce of doubt, every whisper about whether Cleveland believed in him vanished. Shadur delivered. 2 drives. 1 touchdown. Nearly 100 yards. Precision throws, calm pocket presence, confidence dripping from every snap. It wasn't just good football, it was a declaration. The Browns lost the game. But nobody cared. The story was Shedeur. And here's the kicker. Jimmy Haslam wasn't in the stadium to see it. He was in his suite, furious, watching the cameras replay Barry's sideline stroll. In his eyes, this wasn't a football decision. It was insubordination. By the time the final whistle blew, insiders were already whispering about Haslam's patience reaching its end. Threats of Barry being fired before the season even starts filled the post-game chatter. And for the first time in years, the Browns weren't just dysfunctional, they were openly at war with themselves. The players felt it. Locker room energy shifted. Some guys started openly backing Shedeur. They wore his college hoodies. They praised him in interviews. And not subtle, diplomatic praise, the kind of comments that make headlines. Kid's got it. He should be the guy. He's ready now. You can see it. Others, nervous about upsetting ownership, stayed quiet. But the divide was obvious. Cleveland wasn't just dealing with a quarterback competition. They were dealing with a cultural battle. And let's talk about Deion Sanders here for a second. Because you know he wasn't sitting quietly. He wasn't tweeting cryptic Bible verses and walking away. He was watching his son get pulled into an NFL soap opera, and if there's one thing Coach Prime knows how to do, it's control a narrative. So he started making calls. He started talking about protecting his boy. He dropped hints in interviews about teams that respect talent and organizations that know how to win. He never said Cleveland by name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who he meant. And suddenly this wasn't just a Cleveland story. It was national. It was cultural. ESPN, Fox, CNN. Everywhere you turned, it wasn't about the Browns' quarterback situation. It was about Shedeur Sanders versus the system. That's when Haslam realized he'd lost the one thing owners hate to lose more than anything, the narrative. Because now, firing Barry wasn't an option. Not really. Not without looking like the billionaire who crushed his GM for being right. Not without sparking a full-blown fan revolt. And don't underestimate that revolt. Cleveland fans have endured everything. Losing seasons, botched rebuilds, quarterback busts, blown draft picks. But you give them a taste of hope and then you snatch it away? They'll burn the place down. Literally, social media was filled with hashtags demanding Barry stay, demanding Shedeur start, demanding Haslam get out of the way. Some fans even showed up outside training camp with signs, "Let Shedeur play," and Barry was right. It was mutiny. And the more the fans screamed, the more Haslam looked like a man boxed into a corner. Billionaire or not, when the city turns on you, when the national media turns on you, when even your players are whispering about dysfunction, you don't have control anymore. You're just a figurehead. Meanwhile, Shedeur? Cool as ice. Every press conference, every interview he stayed composed. Never threw shade. Never took the bait. Just smiled, answered questions, praised his teammates, and let the circus swirl around him. That only made him more dangerous. Because when one man stays calm in chaos, everyone else starts looking unhinged. Haslam looked paranoid. Gabriel looked bitter. The coaching staff looked clueless. And Shedeur? He looked like the only adult in the room. And here's the irony. Barry's gamble wasn't just about a fifth-round quarterback. It was about vision. He saw this coming. He knew Shedeur wasn't just a player, he was a movement. And movements don't stay contained. They grow. They spread. They force change. So now Cleveland is living in the reality Barry created. A world where Shedeur Sanders has the fans, the media, and half the locker room in his corner. A world where every snap he takes puts more pressure on Haslam. A world where Andrew Barry, the man Haslam threatened to fire, suddenly looks like the smartest guy in the league. And here's the kicker. This is only the beginning. Because what happens when the season starts and Gabriel fumbles in week 1? What happens when Flacco throws a pick-6 in week 2? What happens when the Browns start 0-2, and the chance for Shedeur drown out the boos? Haslam can't fight that. No owner can. Because in the NFL, power doesn't come from money, it comes from momentum. And right now, Shedeur Sanders has all of it. The NFL regular season doesn't wait for your front office drama to cool down. It doesn't care about hurt feelings or billionaire egos. Once week 1 kicks off, the scoreboard becomes the only truth. And in Cleveland? That truth hit fast and it hit ugly. Opening day. The Browns trotted out their safe choice, leaning on the plan Jimmy Haslam insisted on. Veteran leadership. Stability. Dylan Gabriel taking the first-team reps, with Joe Flacco standing in as the emergency backup. And Shedeur? He was helmet on, clipboard in hand, standing on the sideline like an understudy waiting for a show that never lets him on stage. But the problem with putting your eggs in this safe basket is that the safe basket is a myth. Because Gabriel's debut was, let's be polite here, rough. 2 overthrows in the first quarter. A fumble on a critical third down. And that deer-in-headlights look every time the pass rush closed in. You could feel the fans in the stadium starting to shift in their seats. Not booing yet but restless. Whispering. Glancing at the sideline, wondering when the camera would pan to Shedeur. And then late in the second quarter it happened. Chants. We want to see you are. It started with a few hundred voices. By halftime it was a roar. And the broadcast picked it up, blasting it across millions of televisions. Kevin Stefanski tried to play it off. Told reporters at halftime, we're sticking to our game plan. But when Gabriel opened the third quarter with a pick-six, the boos rained down like thunder. Now here's where it gets spicy. The camera caught Andrew Berry in the press box, stone-faced, arms folded, saying nothing. Meanwhile, Jimmy Haslam sat 2 rows over, red-faced, muttering to an assistant, looking every bit the billionaire who realized the castle walls were starting to crumble. And down on the sideline, Shedeur was pacing. Calm, collected, helmet in hand like a soldier waiting for the order. The players saw it. The fans saw it. Everyone knew what was supposed to happen next. But it didn't. Stefanski stuck with Gabriel. Even as the game slipped away. Even as fans booed so loud the offense could barely hear the snap count. Even as social media lit up with hashtags demanding Shedeur take the field. It was stubbornness. Pure and simple. A coaching staff too afraid to cross an owner, too afraid to admit their plan was already unraveling. The Browns lost. And in the post-game presser, Gabriel stood there talking about growing pains and building chemistry, while Stefanski doubled down, insisting Gabriel gives us the best chance to win. Fans weren't buying it. By Monday morning, Cleveland radio shows were ablaze. Callers demanding Shedeur. Analysts ripping the coaching staff. Even national outlets jumping in. Stephen A. Smith? He went nuclear. Said the Browns were sabotaging themselves to protect egos. Skip Bayless called it an insult to the game. It wasn't just about losing, it was about refusing to play the guy everyone knew was better. And here's where the pressure cooker really started to boil. The locker room divided. Half the guys, mostly veterans, stuck with Gabriel, parroting the company line about trusting the process. But the younger players? They were with Shedeur. Loudly. They saw how he commanded attention in practice. They saw how he read blitzes the vets missed. And after week 1, whispers became conversations. Conversations became arguments. Arguments became sides. You can't win games when your locker room is split down the middle. We too. Same story. Gabriel started, stumbled, and the boos grew louder. The chants came earlier. The Browns lost again. And this time, cameras caught Shedeur walking into the tunnel after the game with headphones on, ignoring the press, eyes locked straight ahead. That clip? It went viral. Fans said he looked like a man being chained to the bench. Like a lion locked in a cage. Memes spread, free Shedeur. Bench Gabriel, save Cleveland. By week 3 the situation had become untenable. Even players were hinting at it in interviews. One anonymous quote hit the news cycle like a bomb. We're wasting time. Everybody knows who should be starting. But upstairs won't let it happen. You think that didn't drive Haslam crazy? The man despises leaks. And now his worst nightmare was unfolding. Not only was his quarterback plan failing, but his entire organization looked divided, disloyal, and disorganized. And yet still Shedeur didn't crack. Every press conference he played it cool. Praised Gabriel. Praised his coaches. Never complained. Never lashed out. Which, ironically, made him look like the only leader in the building. By week 4, Cleveland was 0-3. Desperation set in. And finally, Stefanski caved. In a move that looked less like confidence and more like damage control, he named Shedeur the starter. The city erupted. It was like Christmas morning in Cleveland. Bars packed. Tickets sold out. Social media buzzing like a beehive. And when Shedeur took the field. Magic. First drive, 12 plays, 78 yards, touchdown. The kid looked born for the moment. The pocket presence. The accuracy. The calm under pressure. Everything fans had been screaming about for weeks was finally on display. Cleveland didn't just win that game, they believed again. For the first time in years there was real hope. And not the fake kind sold in off-season hype videos. The kind you can actually feel in your chest when the rookie quarterback carves up a defense like it's nothing. But here's the twist. The victory didn't unite the Browns, it split them further. Because while the fans and players were all in on Shedeur, Jimmy Haslam was seething. To him, every touchdown was a reminder that his GM had defied him, that Andrew Berry had won the battle of vision, and that made Shedeur not just a quarterback, but a symbol of rebellion. Symbols are dangerous, because when one player embodies hope, power, and defiance all at once, it changes everything. It changes locker room dynamics. It changes fan loyalty. It changes media coverage. And most importantly, it strips control away from ownership. Haslam knew it. That's why, even as Shedeur started stacking wins, whispers of trade rumors started leaking. Stories about teams monitoring his situation suddenly appeared. Coincidence? Hardly. That was ownership sending a message: don't get too comfortable. But by then it was too late. Shedeur wasn't just a quarterback anymore. He was a movement. And movements? They don't die easy. Because here's what people forget about the NFL: it's not just about winning games. It's about controlling narratives. And Shedeur Sanders had done something even more powerful than leading Cleveland to victory. He'd taken control of the story. Fans weren't talking about Haslam. They weren't talking about Stefanski. They weren't even talking about the Browns' losing streak anymore. They were talking about him. The rookie. The fifth rounder. Primetime's son. The guy who defied the odds, defied the owner, and defied the system, all without ever raising his voice. And if there's one thing that terrifies NFL ownership more than losing games, it's losing the story. Because once the story belongs to the player, the fans follow him, not the franchise. And in Cleveland, for the first time in decades, the fans weren't chanting for the Browns. They weren't chanting for the dog pound. They were chanting one name over and over, louder than the boos, louder than the critics, louder than the billionaire in the box trying to cling to control. Shedeur. Shedeur. Shedeur.